the next flavor we got to talk about, when we're talking about these pickles, we got to talk about salty. So
Yeah. And so when you're talking about how sour is used to refresh the palate, I mean, that's something very rarely a lot of people in our modern world experience because foods are so heavily flavored, aren't they? And, kind of artificially enhanced things like MSG, literally excitotoxins to keep us, kind of on the edge of our palate, craving more. And when you make that reference to the Japanese culture, this is more about natural flavors.
yeah, when we're talking about salt too, and it's very interesting when we look at Japanese culture, the Japanese diet has one of the most elevated sodium contents of any diet on the planet Earth. And yet they have very low heart disease. So when we look at the Western culture, they blame a lot of heart disease on sodium intake in our Western civilization here. The thing is, the Japanese are eating more salt than we are by far, and yet they don't have these heart conditions. So there's two main theories going on there. One is that the form of salt that they're ingesting is different. They're not sprinkling table salt on their food. They're not sprinkling crystal minerals on their food, but they're ingesting the salt in a living form, in the living fermentation. The salt in the fermentation is transformed to a living liquid brine.
And it's naturally sourced, either from rocks or the ocean versus chemically, synthesized sodium chloride with a bit of iodine thrown in.
And the other thing we have to ask ourselves, is the salt the culprit? Is salt the culprit? And when we look at the diets of the traditional American diet, we're definitely looking at seed oils and these wild things, hey, Malcolm.
Yeah.
The salt is not the culprit. It's very fascinating. Yeah, when we look at the taste salty, we're looking at this. The flavor salty is actually very good for the human body as well. So salty taste promotes digestion, is moistening. It also enkindles the digestive fire. It is cutting, biting, sharp fluid. It works as a deobstruent. So salty flavor can actually produce movement. For when we eat, we also must, what goes in must come out eventually, right? So salty taste alleviates vata, which is having elevated vata is when you're very frenetic, full of energy, bouncing this way and that way. It actually alleviates having too much of that. It relieves stiffness, contractions, softens accumulations. It also promotes salivation, cleanses the vessels, softens all the organs of the body, and gives taste to food.
That's right.
So truly, when we're looking at these fermented foods and we see that they're salty, that's one of the reasons why we're adding them to our food.
Yeah.
How sad it is to not have salt on your food.
Right. And so valued that it was the salary, right? It was a form of payment. Now, we've had some great comments come in online as well. So A. Mitchell says, sweet, they think, is such a big part of our palates because most sweet things are or were not poisonous, right? It was an indication of like, this is safe as a food. And it was delicious. It was inviting.